In this part of the video series, I will show you how I installed the Outwales, bulkheads and ribs. Hi, in this video I would like to show you how I lifted the hull of the frame, turned it around, which was quite easy as it is now reinforced with fiberglass, and how I reinforced it with bulkheads and ribs. When the hull was still laying upside down on the frame, I marked the positions of all bulkheads and ribs. Then I started with the preparations of the interior parts. At first the hull was laid on the ground and the frame was disassembled. All feet were shortened during the step and everything was realigned. To ensure stability, the first and third bulkheads were used to create a negative. At the rear, wooden beams were simply placed on the frame and stacked high enough to reach the desired height of the hull. In this area the hull is flat anyway. Next, the fillet of the transom was filled in, as was the corner bracket to stiffen the rudder area. To do this, the contact surfaces were cleaned from dust and degreased and then coated with unthickened epoxy. After that they were filled with epoxy thickened with microspheres, cotton flakes and pigments. The resin was thickened until it had a consistency like peanut butter, poured into a plastic bag and pressed through a small hole into the gap. Finally, the fillet was also stiffened with fiberglass tape saturated with pure epoxy. All bulkheads and ribs were installed in this way, so I won't explain this process again. Next, the centerboard case and the largest bulkhead were inserted but not glued. I did this to figure out the correct position of the longitudinal plate in the bow area, which I should not have glued in next. It later came loose at the very front due to high tension in the bow area. After that, the outwales were sawn out of ashwood plates and prepared for scarfing. They were then glued with slightly thickened epoxy. To prevent the hull from twisting, everything was then aligned with a laser. To do this, measuring points on the transom and on the sides of the hull, on the right and on the left, were compared and the hull was raised on one side using wedges if necessary. Next, the outwales were attached. They were first clamped on with a few clamps and then aligned. This was not possible in the front area due to the overlap of the right and of the left strips, so they were laid on top of each other and sawn to size. They were then clamped in place and all frontal bulkheads were inserted. It is important that the strips are glued in such a way that the hull has its final shape, as it cannot be adjusted afterwards. Therefore, the hull was pressed against the bulkheads with tension straps. The outwales consist of two individual strips that are glued together. Starting at the front, I removed the clamps and coated everything with thickened epoxy. Then, alternating between left and right, more pieces were glued on until the stern was reached. I used all the clamps I had and also some screws which were screwed in from the inside. I used self-tapping stainless steel screws which made the process much easier. By gluing and fixing the sides alternately, I hope to achieve a more evenly bent hull, and this process is allowing the tensioning straps to be tightened directly. And once everything had cured, the ends were cut off. Tensioning the outwales made the hull slightly narrower and longer in the bow area. The force was so high that the hull detached from the front longitudinal stiffener plate and a gap appeared. To fix this, the sides of the crack were sealed with thickened epoxy, and once everything had cured, the interior was filled with unthickened epoxy. After that, all transverse bulkheads and ribs were glued in place. This process is the same as explained at the beginning. Whenever an area was finished, the protruding hull areas were sawn off. Then the remaining frames and ribs were glued in place, along with the reinforcements for the shroud fittings and for the mast support. Yes, and this is what the boat looks like with all the bulkheads and ribs in place. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time. Ciao!